everybody, Sociology Squad, hope you're all okay. Going to go through the AS paper for component 1, which is what you're going to be sitting on Thursday, exam guidelines. So guys, you've got two sections, section A and section B. Section A is the intro to socialisation, culture and identity, and then section B is the media. And actually, what do I want to do? Yeah, okay. So section A, you're going to have 4 questions. Number 1 will be define the concept of. Now that can be anything to do with socialisation, nature, nurture, anything to do with culture. So think about all the different types of culture and identity as well. Number 2 will be with reference to the source, identify and briefly explain 2 examples of. So remember, you'll always have 2 unseen sources. It will be normally a key term that you're given for question number 2. And then you will have to, of course, give 2 examples of what you can see in the source. Next is using your wider sociological knowledge, explain how. Now that might be how the peer group socialises, or how national identity is socialised, could something to be do with social control. So really need to know the specification inside out, and then tailor your revision around that specification. Now, if you're using the personal learning checklist that I've made for you, that will really help you with that. Then you've got outline and briefly evaluate the view. So suggested timings, spend 5 minutes reading the source and to plan it, so literally highlight and annotate it as much as you can. Question 1 is worth 4 marks. I said spend 5 minutes. I don't think you really need to. I know most of you are quite quick writers. If you are a quick writer, you know, get it over and done with, move on. Whereas if you are a bit of a slower writer, which is absolutely fine, then take that full 5 minutes. You know, it's completely up to you and how you do this. Question 2 is worth 6 marks, so again 5 minutes. Question 3 is worth 8 marks, so I'd therefore spend about 10. And question 4 is 12, and therefore you should really spend about 15, because of course it's the highest marking question. So question number 1 will be to define a concept. For example, define the concept of high culture. You need to give a core meaning. Now remember guys, a core meaning is not simply a definition, because a definition is normally 1 sentence. A core meaning is worth 2 marks. So you really need to make sure that it's detailed and developed. You then need to give examples. Give 2 examples of whatever it is that you are giving the core meaning for. Or if you can't think of 2 examples, think of 2 different types. So this is an exemplar answer for high culture. So high culture is a type of shared socially transmitted behaviour patterns which is learnt within upper social groups. For example, can include cultural products and activities which are seen to have had high status, such as Shakespeare. Secondly, presents the highest achievements and is seen as superior and appreciated by those of a high level of education. So as you can see, I've highlighted in blue the core meaning, and then you've got your 1 example and your 2nd example there. Okay, question number 2 is the source question. So with reference to the source, identify and briefly explain 2 examples of cultural hybridity. So you need to identify and explain it with 2 examples. So state an idea, explain it, what you mean by it, and then give 2 examples from the source to back it up. Okay, and so you need to show the examiner you can interpret and apply the source with your own knowledge. So this is kind of like an outline of how you could answer it. So point the subject of the question, to state what it is, and always, guys, reuse the question in your opening sentence. So if the question is, I don't know, yeah, explain 2 examples of cultural hybridity, you could say cultural hybridity means, tell me what it means, and then you would give them 2 examples from the source to back it up, which is basically what you can see here. Okay, question number 3, with reference to the source, identify and brief. Oh, sorry, here I've got you still working on question 2. I've given you an exemplar. So cultural hybridity is when culture merges. For example, the UK is a hybrid as it contains English, Scottish, Welsh and Irish culture, but also has influence of Asian, Caribbean and US and European. Explain it. McLuhan argued in the 60s, the world has become a smaller place, therefore we now live in a global village. This has been driven by a globally accessible media and the internet. Sociologists have noticed the emergence of global culture, which is the product of a process of globalization, implying that cultures can no longer be seen as separate from each other. What happens in one society is interconnected with others. And then you need 2 examples from the source. So here's the first one. For example, the first source shows cultural hybridity because the opera has become a popular leisure activity, particularly for the upper classes. This is not a British activity, however, originates from Italy. As the source suggests, a major cause for this is the media. Because we know, guys, that operas are normally written in Italian. In the second source, we can see Notting Hill Carnival, which is a celebration of cultural diversity in London. Caribbean culture has been adopted in British societies due to second, third generation immigrants who adopt hybrid identities, mixing aspects of their parents' culture with aspects of British culture. Okay, so you can see, again, I've colour coded it, so it's nice and clear for you. Okay, so your next question, number 3, is worth 8 marks. Now remember, guys, even though this is quite an older, it's worth more marks. It's not an evaluation. It's still just explanation. And I've kind of, I'll get rid of that first. Sorry, so this is like an RS old, no, ignore that completely. Sorry, old thing there. So use words of the question and explain the subject of the question to show you understand it. So using words like this shows, linking it back to the question. Quote the source. This suggests, in reference to source A. Show why it is relevant and focus on the wording of the question. So the first paragraph should really focus on the source, and then your second paragraph, use your wider knowledge and try to get 2 examples in each one. So always remember, we use our point, evidence, evidence, link, point, evidence, evidence, link. So the mark scheme for the 8 marker, AO1 is worth 4 marks. So you need at least 2 correct sociological ideas. And then your AO2, which is your application, for 4 marks, both ideas are fully developed. So you could have this one as an example. Explain the difference between formal social control and informal social control. Pick 3 things to say for each. So state your point using the terms, develop it by explaining its meaning, give an example, link it back to the source at least once. So guys, you can do it the way I've just said it. So these are 2 different ways you can answer it. You can either do the 2 separate paragraphs, that first paragraph on the source, one on the second, or you can do it in this other way where you pick 3 things to say and then linking it back each time. So here is an example of an 8 marker. So you say the difference between formal and informal social control is the way that they make people do what is considered the right thing, conforming to norms and values. This control is achieved through an application of reward and punishment. Punishments are called negative sanctions, and they are intended to deter people from doing the wrong thing in society, such as detentions at school. Guys, I won't carry on reading this. I will put on this PowerPoint for you, but you can take some time seeing that. But you can then see the red is obviously the point, the purple, I've given an example, then I have developed it. But make sure, that you're using lots of studies and lots of evidence in this. So point, explain, example, link to the source. Point, explain it, example, link to the source. So you can do it in this way, or you can just do 2 separate paragraphs. It's completely up to you. There's 2 ways of doing it for you. Okay, guys, so question 4. Okay, so for question 4, it is worth 12 marks. And this is going to require you to now have a debate using your studies. So focus on the question, use wording of the question in your opening line, show arguments for and against using studies and key concepts. Now, this is worth 4 subject knowledge marks for AO1, 4 AO2, which is your application, and 4 AO3, so that's your evaluation. So they're all even. So I personally would start off with a little mini intro, using language of the question. Then I'll do my argument for the statement, okay, with at least 4 studies. Now, make sure you do that in the right order. You need to argue what the statement is saying, and then you counter argue it, okay? If you don't do that, you won't be getting the top marks. You then do an argument against, again, with at least 4 studies, because remember, a range of studies is at least 4, and if you can include more, please do so. Now, the studies should connect with each other. You should be, if you're just kind of whacking in any old study, that has relevance to the question, then you are not making a reasoned argument. So you need to make sure that the studies that you are using actually counter argue one another, that they are linked, and that you then explain how they are. And that's your application marks. If you just kind of whack them in, like, oh, that's something to do with age, that's something to age, and therefore we're going to do that, then that is juxtaposing your studies. You won't get the top marks, okay? Then I just put a mini conclusion stating which side of the argument is the most convincing. Okay, section B is the media. So when you open up your exam paper to then section B, you'll see 3 options. You'll have families, which is option A. Option B is youth subculture, then option C is the media. Cross out family, cross out youth. We are not doing those 2 sections, go straight to the media. Okay, so I would spend 5 minutes on the first one, which is question 13, worth 5 marks. Question 14 is 8 marks, about 10 minutes. Question 15 is 12 marks, about 15. And then question 16 is worth 20, so 20 minutes. Now, these questions do not relate to the source, so don't worry about those. Okay, so question 13, define and briefly explain the concept of. You need core meaning, explain it, 2 pieces of evidence. So the same as question 1. Question 14, identify and briefly describe 2 examples of. So use point, explain. Remember, I'm an idiot, so explain everything in detail. In the last one you did, guys, you were using good sociological terms like validity and reliability, but then you didn't explain what they meant. So whenever you use a sociological concept, make sure you are explaining it, because again, that just adds to your points. And then give 2 pieces of evidence and back up your point with research, okay? Do it twice, the same as question 2, really. No, it's not. Yeah, it is. No, it's not. Okay, so question 15, explain reasons for. So this one, 12 marks. So pick 3 key things to say. Each should then have 2 pieces of evidence. So it's basically 3 P's, and link it back, really. Relink it back to the question. Don't lose sight of the question. Then question 16 is worth 12 marks. This is your evaluation. Focus on the question. Use wording of the question in your opening sentences, and you're going to show arguments for and against using studies. So this is 6 AO1, which is subject knowledge, 4 AO2, which is your application, and 10 AO3, which is your evaluation. So really, guys, you need 3 developed paragraphs to get to the 20 marks, and in each you need to include 2 studies to agree, and then counter argue it with 2 studies against. So you're really having that for and against, for and against, for and against, doing it 3 times. Now, the evidence that you use, really similar to question 4, it needs to link together. It needs to actually make an argument against what you've just said. Again, if you've just kind of whacked in any study, then that'll be juxtaposing them, which will not get you the highest marks. And then again, use a mini conclusion, write a mini conclusion, choosing which side that you most agree with, okay? So I hope that all makes sense for you. If you do have any questions, make sure you drop me a line, and I look forward to marking your work on Thursday/Friday, okay?